Welcome to Levant Vibes. I'm your host, Ola Diab. And this podcast is all about stories from the Levant region that inspire, challenge, and connect us. Today, I'm joined by Edgard, a Lebanese humanitarian who spent 22 years with the UN, leading emergency responses across Iraq, Nigeria, Papua New Guinea, and beyond. From growing up in a huge Lebanese family, he has over 100 cousins. I'm not kidding. To walking away from a thriving family business to serve in crisis zones. Edgar shares powerful reflections on leadership, resilience, and purpose. We talk about what it really takes to work in the UN, leading under pressure, the toughest moments of his career, and why he went back to do his master's degrees in his 50s. This episode is filled with warmth, wisdom, courage, compassion, and honest lessons. The quiet kind of leadership that doesn't necessarily make the headlines, but you know what? Changes lives. So, let's dive in. Hey, it's good. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's pleasure to speak with someone from a neighbor country. So I want to touch on that a little bit. You were born in Lebanon, lived there until the age of 15, returned at 21, but then after a long international career, you're back again. So tell me, what was it like growing up in Lebanon? How did that shape the person and a humanitarian you are? And I just want to know why you keep coming back. What's pulling you back?
Great questions. I think maybe that's a good way for me to plug the book I'm writing. It's called The Tale of the Wooden Spoon. It has everything to do with growing up in Lebanon and then leaving and coming back and all the work that I've done. I believe it has a lot to do with the fact that growing up in Lebanon, the old cliche of the fact that it teaches you resilience and it teaches you to be adaptable and it teaches you to basically overcome whatever challenge might be ahead of you. I also think that it's also been kind of a bit of a detriment of being of getting used to being resilient and adaptable and not having anything that's sustainable where it's not just about surviving but it's more about thriving. And I think this has been probably the biggest lesson I've learned from being outside of the country, working in humanitarian situations, seeing disasters, seeing wars, seeing health pandemics. The fact that being resilient and adaptable is good while you're doing something, but if you want to look further ahead, it's better to be sustainable. It's better to be sure. It's better to walk on more solid ground than living as if it's the last day on earth and knowing that tomorrow might not come. And so you might as well live your last breaths the way anybody would want to, which is with happiness and gratefulness. But I think it kind of wears down on you. So I think this is in combination, probably these living here and living abroad kind of taught me that adaptability and resilience are great, but wanting to be sustainable and assured of what your future looks like is much better.
That's a very, very interesting perspective. I think growing up in Middle East makes you quite resilient. That's a very interesting one to talk about, like this whole sustainability, because it can be hard to design your future. Unfortunately, in our regions, I'm always proud of my resilience because I think I grew up there. But I think it's quite interesting perspective as well. Do you think it's different now, Lebanon, to the Lebanon you grew up in?
For me, it is different because I've done different things. I think for those who have never left, who have never traveled, they're still living in their own bubble. You're constantly hearing words like the good old days of the war, and this when the war was going on, the Lebanese pound was much stronger. Yeah, it maybe have been stronger, but people were dying around you, and people were starving, and people had to basically break their backs to cross between East and West Beirut. So it's all of these things that just people wanting to feel nostalgic about something, about the Lebanon of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And if you look back in history, it's almost the same. Every decade has its own problem, but we always think that what was is much better than what could be. So I like to live for what could be rather than what was. And basically, whatever action I take, whatever decision I make, is based on, well, what could be. And they're big risks that I've taken, and I believe that they've paid off. I wouldn't trade a single moment of my life for anything that I could have done different, because I think I'm where I am because of the things that I've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's jump into that because you've taken big risks. You were running a successful family manufacturing business in Lebanon, but then you decided to leave all of this to pursue an international career with UNICEF. So I'm really interested what drove this decision, but also how a person can go from being a local entrepreneur and be able to join a global humanitarian organization.
Well, it's simple. If you understand what your priorities are supposed to be in life, and at that particular point, my priority was my family. I was putting in close to 20 hours a day working. At the press, there was a place called Express International Diaries at the time. Obviously, diaries aren't what they used to be today, but back then they were something. When I joined UNICEF in 2004, it was almost a calling because what they were looking for was exactly what I had been doing. So I was very lucky in that regard. There was very few people that understood the entire manufacturing process, and I happened to be one of those people that made myself available to UNICEF to go and work for them. Well, it was a tough decision, but going back to why I made that decision, it was my family. Being away from my son, who at the time was 9 years old, and my daughter, who had just turned 2.5. I wasn't seeing them. Wasn't seeing them off to school in the morning. I wasn't seeing them before they went to bed at night. I felt that I was missing out on a lot of their time.
And what type of work did you do for UNICEF to start with?
I started off as what they called a production control officer. Two of the greatest bosses I've ever had at UNICEF. They recognized something in me that somebody else maybe would have seen as a negative. But what they did was they saw something that was very powerful within me, and they decided to just completely remove me from the work that they thought they hired me for, to doing something that they saw I was very strong in. Basically, I was hired to write specifications and terms of reference for multiple products that UNICEF was producing to sell for fundraising. And they very quickly realized that I don't have a mind that's very, very strong in following detail. And within the first few weeks of me being at UNICEF, I got called into my boss's office. And you can only imagine, by the way, what it would be like after a few weeks of getting your dream job to be called into your boss's office. So
Okay.
I went in thinking I'm going to basically go home and go back to working 20 hours a day. But as it turned out, they both called me in. It was my supervisor and his direct supervisor to basically tell me that, listen, you're obviously someone who's really not good at writing specifications. But we've listened to you speak with vendors. We've listened to you expedite the work that needs to be expedited. We've listened to you negotiate. And we've listened to you bringing people from product development and production and procurement together. And we think that this is where your strength lies. And because this is where your strength lies, this is where we want you to work full time. So I was directed to basically go visit the factories where I was working because I understood manufacturing and I understood the production process from an industrial point of view. And I was able to succeed over the 4 or 5 years that I was in Geneva. This was the first job I had. It was in Geneva. So I was able to do really well, and I made it evolve to creating the corporate social responsibility framework for all of the different manufacturers where we were working, writing up the social audit questionnaires that would go with them, working on creating the first risk assessment framework for all of the toys and products that we were doing, which helped me become very savvy on toy safety and toy manufacturing, which took me from producing diaries to becoming an expert on corporate social responsibility, social audits, safety in toys and toy manufacturing. So it opened up huge horizons for me. And I'm extremely grateful for these two men. And if I may just mention them, it's one gentleman, his name is Hasso Krampen. He was the chief of our section, and Bernhard Struth, who was my direct supervisor. So I was blessed to have these two guys that understood where my strengths were and actually acted upon them.
This is the power of great leaders. They identify what's good in us and they help us in that path. And look where you are. You continue to work with UNICEF for 22 years more. So that's just incredible. And after working with head offices in Geneva, but also in Copenhagen. You ended up working in emergency responses in places like Iraq, Papua New Guinea. As someone who worked in Syria during emergency response, I think when I reflected at my time there, I loved it. It was so fast paced, you get things done very quickly, but at the same time, it's hectic, it can be exhausting. You have your life can be at risk as well. So tell me more about working in emergency. What was that like? But also, what do you think the kind of leadership is needed to work under these circumstances?
Yeah. In one of the poems I wrote for my book, there's one line, and it says, "At the edge of my bed, I sat and cried my father's last breath before he died." These two lines to me were very powerful in what drove me to doing what I did. I can think of dozens of times where I literally sat at the edge of my bed and I just completely broke down. Not just the stress of being at work, but the stress of being away from family, from being away from my pillow, and just smell. Where if you're having someone brought in kusa mahshi into the office, it made me think of my mother's cooking. So all of these different things that started to happen involuntarily would just by the time I'm finished and I went back to my hotel and I'm just sitting at the edge of my bed and I would just plop my head down, my head would drop and tears would just flow. And it helped a lot because I never carried any emotion. And not because of the emergencies, because I just never have. I love to cry and I love to laugh even more. It was okay for me to do that, but it was also great for me to reflect on the fact from a personal perspective, what it was like to be in an emergency, to be away from your family for 3 months at a time. And emergencies are not the most fun things because of the things that you see. Wars and natural disasters and health emergencies are all the same because there's always death. And with UNICEF, we work with children. And so the misery of children is always something that makes you reflect on your own. And when you start seeing your own, then you start to realize that the work that we do is so important that it does drive us away from our own families, from our own children. But it's to give somebody else the chance to feel the way we do about our families and children. And it's this kind of thought process that starts to go through your mind. And of course, the work, the technical aspect of it, it's not something that comes easy, but it's something that should come to you naturally. And it should be something that's inherently inside you. How you think of things and how you create different ways of moving products around and stuff. I mean, that's great and good, but it's understanding why you're doing the work that you're doing is really what drove me personally. And it's always been my greatest driver when it comes to my team is always making sure that they understand why we do what we do. It's not about what it is that we do. We all know what UNICEF does or how to do it. That's why we're doing it for such a great organization. But it's often why we're doing it that gets forgotten. And I think it's important that you yourself are reminded of it and those around you are also reminded of it and understand it very, very well. And they must live it. I mean, to last for 22 years in UNICEF, you have to live what the ideals of UNICEF are. Otherwise, you're really not going to last. It's not a business, it's not a corporation. Hasso Krampen, going back to him, the first thing he told me was UNICEF basically, when we do our annual report, we see if we've generated great success by how many children under 5 didn't die that particular year. It's about the value of a soul, and that soul is a child. So it's really amazing when you think of it, and that's why I like to call it a calling. And it wasn't just a
Yes.
job, because there's something spiritual about working for a humanitarian organization. And if people forget that, then that's where they get into trouble.
It is very tough to work in emergency situations because you have pressure from both ends. We talked about how tough it could be working with the UN. What do you think there are other things that people probably don't know about working within the UN system? Like for me, one of the things I realized how competitive it is. It's quite competitive to get in. It's quite competitive to stay in as well. It's very dependent on funding. Things can change very quickly. Anything else comes to your mind or
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Once you get that job, it's very difficult for you to leave that job. It's a highly competitive environment, and this goes back to the calling that I was saying about you being humanitarian, and not a calling for you to just make money or because financially It's a very good paying job. The benefits are fantastic. The insurance that you get is amazing. The education subsidies that you get are incredible, and just the fact that you get to see the world are is enough for me to want to take that job.
And do meaningful job as well. That's like a plus on top of all of it to be able to do something meaningful.
Absolutely. I can tell you that the first job I applied for, I was in Geneva and I didn't get it. And I thought, you know what, forget it. I'm never going to work for the UN. I tried, and it's something I know I could do, and I didn't get it, so there's no way. And then this other job came up, and a friend of mine who kept telling me, no, you should go for it. And his advice to me was, the UN, a UN application is like the lottery. You just have to keep applying, and eventually you might win. And it is a win because it's the satisfaction you get from that job is beyond words.
So, if someone listening to us and they're dreaming of a career in the UN or a humanitarian field, what's your unfiltered advice for them? What they should do, what they should have?
My advice is the UN values education. That plays a big role into whether you're going to be sustained within the UN or not, whether you're going to be promoted within the UN. So education is a major factor. So if somebody's graduating from university today, I would have to advise them, go ahead and get your master's degree, because eventually you're going to need it if you want a career in the UN. Because they all see things from an academic point of view, because we need to research, we need to gather evidence. Because when you're looking for funds to complete a project or a proposal that you have, it has to be backed up with evidence, it has to be backed up with research. So that's my first advice, is get your master's degree. The second point is, don't worry about where you're going. If they send you to the worst place on earth or the best place on earth, it really doesn't matter. You will be safe. You will be taken care of. The duty of care that the UN has is something that I've never seen in any other organization. So if you get an offer to go work in the middle of a war zone, take it. You will be taken care of. Now, accidents happen, of course, but as far as the United Nations is concerned, you will be taken care of. So be sure to get whatever experience you're given, and don't be afraid of it. And don't be afraid of being away from your family if you let your emotions out at the end of the day and don't bottle anything in. You'll just get through it. It's okay. And you'll come out either a poet, not such a great poet, or you'll come out with a job in Copenhagen one day, or even in Geneva. So that's the second advice. The third advice is, and this is where the unfiltered part comes in. It's do your work, excel at your work, be the most amazing person at your work, but at the same time, just keep your head down. Don't look at things that you cannot change, or don't think that you can go after things that you cannot change. It's a very difficult thing to change. And if you get frustrated by it, and again, I'm talking from experience, because you're wanting to change something that cannot be changed overnight. So if you do get the opportunity and the privilege to be part of the UN, just be mindful of the change. And a lot of change is needed, but be mindful of the time it could actually take. So when you do want to discuss it or speak up about it from that perspective, not from overnight change. Plant that tree so somebody else can sit in its shade. And those are the three biggest pieces of advice I can give to somebody who's thinking about it. Unfortunately, now with all of the funding and the reduction in funding, many of the donors, the opportunities are becoming slimmer, but the work is becoming more important. So we might not be doing some of the work that we've always done. I mean, I've always said the purpose of your job is to become redundant. If you don't work with the purpose of being redundant in a country office, then you really have no being in that country office.
Um, you've got two beautiful kids, Haley and Nicola, and now you're moving on from the UN. What would you like them to carry forward from your journey and from what you've seen in the world as well?
They're both on the extreme sides of the political point of view and ideological point of view when it comes to government. But what they both have in common is they're honest and they have integrity. I think they've carried from my wife and I, not just from me, because sacrifices that my wife has had to make are huge as well, especially from the career choices that I've taken. Is honesty and integrity, and no matter where you are on that spectrum, if you have those two things, then you're doing the right thing. So that's really important.
I love that. I saw one of your latest LinkedIn posts and you were talking about your mom and how now you can see her more often in Lebanon. And it hit a chord because it's a privilege, at least for me, to be able to spend time with my mom. I think the sacrifices we made sometimes because of our life choices, and of course, you made some of them for the UN. So, how does it feel to be back and closer to your mom now?
Well, does two giant plates of kusa batinjeen mahshi sound really good to you? Then I recommend you call your mom and tell her I really want to eat either one of those things, and you'll see on the table when you go to visit her. Obviously, family is the most important thing in anybody's purpose, and I was privileged enough to be able to stop at a time in my life and be with my mother. I didn't have the privilege of being there when my father passed. So these are two driving forces that have led me to where I am today. And this goes back to my father's last breath before he died. It's the importance of being there. It's not just about you. It's about, when I always talk about missing birthdays and missing baptisms and missing ballet recitals and all of these different things that you see a lot of your peers actually doing, especially if you're looking on social media, spending time with their families and not just their immediate families, their brothers and sisters and cousins and all of that. So and we come from huge families. I mean, it's not a cliche, but I do have 100 cousins on my mom's side of the family. It's missing out on all of that, where you only have 2 weeks in the summertime to come and enjoy the food and the familiarity of where you come from. And that to me goes back to what I said in the very beginning. It's great to be resilient and adaptable, but it's much more important to have a longer term vision of where you want to be or where you want your country to be. We're privileged as Lebanese that we can go work outside anywhere, and we have a great diaspora, but it's just so much more important to be home than to be outside now. And you see it at the airport when people come back for holidays in Lebanon. There's 10,000 people waiting outside of the gates for a plane that only has 200 people in it. And then there's the dancing outside, and then there's the music, and it's just such a happy place.
This is beautiful. Oh, it almost made me cry. But 100 cousins, that's a lot of cousins.
Imagine how those are costly weddings.
But fun wedding, I would say as well. Edgard, a lot of things inspire me about you. One of them is that you went and you did a master's degree in your 50s.
Don't ever tell people how old I am.
But okay. How old are you?
I'm 56. I'm 56 young. But what you don't know about me is that I also got my bachelor's degree 2 years before I got my MBA. So I had started university. I went through 4 years of university when I was right out of high school, and then I did not want to be an engineer. So I failed myself out of school because I wanted to be a teacher. And since I couldn't be an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor, then I became rebellious, and I told my mom that I will not be any of those things at all. And then I realized much later that actually I do need to be something. So I did my bachelor's 2 years before I did my MBA as well. So it's not just an MBA. I finished my entire education in the last 5 years. And the MBA part was more of a personal journey rather than one that had to do with the fact that I needed a bachelor's degree to be promoted within UNICEF because of, like I mentioned before, the importance of education. So that was very to move forward and progress. But with the MBA, it was more of a personal journey. And that personal journey is something that I had done over the last 22 years working for UNICEF. And I wanted to basically research what it would be like to think as an entrepreneur when working for a huge organization like the UN. And I wanted to actually start applying that, not necessarily for the UN, but my older brother has this amazing foundation that he basically finances on his own. And I wanted to be a lot more successful than he ever imagined because it's very close to our hearts. How can I use what I know and use my entrepreneurial skills into making it into something that's much bigger than he imagined. So that was it from a very personal and it didn't matter if I had it or didn't have it for my career because I already have 35 years of
Yeah.
experience as a professional. What it mattered to me because I wanted to be something huge, and because I was the last one of my four brothers and sisters to get a bachelor's degree, I wanted to also be the highest educated out of all of them. So I'm the only one that has a master's degree.
I love this. I honestly I'm obsessed about that. So thanks for sharing. So to end the show, I wanna ask, what's next for Edgard?
So I want to finish my book. I want to spend more time with my mom, and I want to basically take everything I've learned over the last 35 years and help either governments or organizations. So that's really what I'm working on now, is spreading smiles and hopefully saving more lives.
What mission? Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Edgar. This has been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for coming on the show.